Thank you, Neil. Right. So when I talked to the conference committee about the possibility of having a talk on this subject, I must say my immediate thought was, it's really not very interesting. You've all heard it before. Actually, maybe there are a few of you who haven't. But history has been around for 30 years or so, as far as the LBMA is concerned. So after my first attempt at putting together this presentation, which you will find on the website, I decided I would rewrite it. I went to visit Varsha and Neil last week. We agreed I should kind of sex it up just a bit. Tell you about all the times that people have tried to bribe me, all the attempts at cheating on the assays. It would be really nice to be able to tell you that. Unfortunately, I can't. I'm not saying why I can't. Could be because it never happened, or I'm very discreet. But I will try and give some anecdotes and some examples of the more interesting developments and how they did occur. So let's look at Scope Mark II. And this will be on the website, so you don't need to make notes or anything if you are interested. I'm not going to go through all the bullet points on every slide. I'm going to pick out some which are of, I hope, greater interest. I'm going to talk a bit about the good delivery evolution, the evolution, it's a favorite topic of mine, of the system. The LBMA, as well as its predecessors in the good delivery area, the Bank of England, the London gold and silver markets. And then I will also talk a bit about how the requirements for good delivery applicants, as well as proactive monitoring, have evolved over the years. So before the LBMA, we had, of course, the Bank of England. The Bank of England, with its first gold list, was actually only one company in 1754. And the bank's last list, which it published for the market, was in 1933. And interestingly, that had melters and assayers, not just from London, but from a number of countries, France, Switzerland, South Africa, Australia, and so on. Melters and assayers, which changed in the future. Then we had the London gold market, which for many years was responsible for the good delivery list, taking over directly from the bank in 1934. But the market had existed for a long time before that, and it had introduced the famous London gold fixing in 1919, and it was really Rothschild's bank, which was a chairman of the fix, a chairman of the gold market, a chairman of everything. Rothschild was the gold market, and we were very grateful to Rothschilds when the LBMA was formed. They gave us a huge amount of information about all the previous accreditations. It was a fantastic resource, which, of course, we still have and value greatly. When it comes to the silver market, sorry, I should say, if you are interested in the early history of the gold market and the good delivery list, this publication, which the LBMA produced in 2010, is still available, and you can get it from Amazon, I believe. Modern approach. So the silver market, which was not Rothschild, in fact Rothschild was not a member of the silver market, it was Mokata, originally Mokata and Goldsmith, which became Bank of Nova Scotia. And I'm sure they did a great job of organising the London silver market, including the fix, which their fix started well before the gold fixing, started in 1897. However, they were not quite so good at keeping records of all the accreditations which were achieved. We, in fact, received a very little. And I have tried to find from the various companies' archives that historical record, but it does seem to be largely missing. So, just for once, let me talk a bit more about the role of the Bank of England. And I'm going to more or less read this slide because it's very important that people understand both the past and the continuing importance of the Bank of England. Now, quite apart from the record going back to 1750 in the book that I just mentioned, the bank was bullion markets regulator until 2000, when the Financial Services Authority was formed. The bank holds a large amount of gold for many central banks and government institutions, many of which are clients of the LBMA members. That's very important. The bank holds also gold for many, or at least a number of LBMA members, and it only holds gold on an allocated basis. So it's just looking after your bars. It's not like unallocated accounts that commercial banks can provide. And that means that all good bars in the Bank of England's vault, held on behalf of customers, banks, central banks, etc., must be London good delivery. And the bank has an active and ongoing interest in the quality of metal that is traded through the London market. And that is reflected in the fact that it still has an observer on the LBMA board. And of course, as Ruth just mentioned, the LBMA's new chairman, Paul Fisher, Dr. Paul Fisher, was an executive director of the bank. And he used to be our contact at the bank in the days of the LBMA. So it's maybe now not just that we all look out for the governor of the Bank of England raising an eyebrow when something happens that he doesn't like. The bank is very much involved as a partner of the London market and the LBMA. And I'm going to say a little bit about transparency. When I joined the LBMA, I think there was one picture in the world outside the Bank of England showing its vault, and this was it. And we were very proud that it was on the LBMA website. We had managed to get a picture of gold bars from the Bank of England vault, and that is it. Now, if you'd looked up Google, if it had existed in these days, that's probably what you would have seen if you'd asked to review all the Google images. Well, I did that just the other day, and this is the first page of many thousands of Google images when you Google Bank of England vault and gold. And you can see that things have changed. We are now, I wouldn't like to say post-transparency because that sounds as if we don't have it anymore. This is now the transparency era, the era of Glasnost in the Bank of England. And you can see that they'll let just almost anyone in nowadays, or at least anyone who's got some interest in gold. So how did this Glasnost come about? Well, I think it started maybe in the 2006 annual report of the bank. And if you knew where to look, you could find out what the total gold reserves were. It had a figure in sterling for the amount of gold on its balance sheet. It's not actually an asset, but the amount of gold that was held in terms of the value at balance sheet date. So if you knew the price of gold on the balance sheet date, you could work out what that tonnage was. But it was just a single figure. Things changed later. But then, somewhat amusingly, I must say, there was Professor Polyakov. If I'm not mistaken, he was a former school friend or maybe college friend of the governor. And suddenly, in 2012, he turned up with a video cameraman, here they are, and was given total free access to take video, films, etc., in the Bank of England gold vaults. I believe the staff were a bit surprised about this, but this really was the start of that Glasnost as far as the bank was concerned. And perhaps more importantly, later on, we got, just in the last year, monthly holdings. So that figure that I mentioned, now the bank has published it. It publishes it with a 3-month delay. I think this has been largely thanks to discussions with the LBMA, and so we now can see the bank holdings back to 2011 on a monthly basis. And the bank also has many other examples of the new transparency, videos. The website looks completely different. It's got a huge amount of information about gold in it. There's this Flickr page, so you can see more thousands of images if you want. There's an app, etc., etc. So let's move on to the Bank of England and its past involvement. Now, this is the first bullet point, which I'm not going to go through all these points individually. You can look them up later when this is on the website, should you wish. And instead, I would just say that there has been a gradual diminution. In the days of the London gold market, there was this formulaic phrase that was always used. They would ask the Bank of England before accepting an application for technical assessment. And they wanted to get a nod from the bank, sometimes with the bank going out to a foreign central bank. For instance, some Japanese refiners come in, the Bank of England would consult with the Bank of Japan before advising the market. And that gradually changed, I would say, over the years. So by the time we got to 2000, the LBMA at that time could accredit gold refiners as long as it was certain of the due diligence aspect and the technical aspects, without necessarily expecting the Bank of England to have given this nod of approval. So the LBMA arrived in 1987. It took over from the London gold and silver markets the responsibility for the good delivery list. And it's interesting, I think, that just in the last couple of years, the LBMA has now taken over from the successors, the London gold and silver fixing markets, responsibility for its spot prices. So this has kind of come full circle. The first LBMA list was in 1988, the year after it was formed, hardly surprising. But then in 1993, we got the first LBMA handbook. It was a fairly slim thing, 120 A5 pages. It had in it, for the first time, the rules for good delivery applicants, and various other things, including, as you can see at the bottom, compliance. Ruth talked about regulation, etc. I think she might be quite interested, I'm sure she knows, and you might be, to see what we said about compliance in the LBMA handbook of 1993. And there it is. That's the lot. And things have changed quite a bit since then. So, good delivery perestroika. This is a very important slide because it describes, perestroika, remember, is reconstruction, and this is reconstruction of the good delivery system. It's involved an expanded referees panel going from 2 2 UK companies, Johnson Matthey and Engelhard Clall, to 5 international refiners. It made a huge difference to the way we did the good delivery assay testing and bar testing. Everything was done on a blind basis. We also had proactive monitoring was introduced at the same time. And finally, the executive took responsibility rather than London vaults. So this was an absolutely huge change. So let's now quickly go through each of the main aspects of the good delivery system in terms of testing, and first looking at assay fineness. I think one of the most interesting things here was that up until 1977, the system was that applicants sent their bars and at the same time 2 lots of 24 buttons, assay sample buttons, which our poor referees were expected to assay. Now, these referees here maybe don't know that. It was a terrible system. We were not testing the applicant, we were testing the referees as much as anything. And then in 1977, it was decided, no, let's get the referees to make some samples, cross-check them against each other's labs, and then these were used, these were sent. And this is the system that has been used ever since. One other thing that I will say about the item that happened in 2004, where we changed to 5-figure comparisons. Now, I can remember having a battle with one of the previous referees, because previously, the comparison of results was done on a 4-figure basis. The applicant had to provide a 5-figure assay and a 4-figure interpretation, and that 4-figure interpretation was used to compare with the referee's reference value 4-figure interpretation. I thought that was a terrible system. I still think it is, and indeed it is. Doing it on a 5-figure basis, doing the comparisons on a 5-figure basis was the right way, and that's the way that we've done it ever since 2004. Now, just going back to 1986, the year before the LBMA was formed, we had an application from Metalor USA, and Metalor USA didn't like our system of going from a 5-figure assay to a 4-figure assay, and our system was actually wrong. The rounding allowed you to round up to 4 nines, which is fine everywhere else, but it's not fine at 4 nines. Metalor really objected to this. They were told, if you don't use our system of rounding, i.e. rounding up to 4 nines, then the 4-figure comparisons might fail your application, which it did. And so Metalor were extremely annoyed, quite rightly, threatened to sue us. It didn't actually come to that. Sorry, it wasn't us, it was the London gold market. But eventually, sense prevailed. They didn't sue us, and they were accredited, quite rightly. But it did take until 2004 for the LBMA to admit that we should have a system where you cannot round up. 99986 is not 4 nines. And as we show here also, the same applies nowadays to 995. You cannot round up 99486 to 995. Now, Neil, I've come to the end of my time almost on this, but do you want me just to go through my few remaining slides? Happy for me to do that? Okay. I'm just going to pick out, as I said, some of the highlights. Bar dimensions, what has gradually happened over over the period since the LBMA was founded is that we have asked for more and more specifications. And specifications, started off being approximate, then they were ranges, and then they were recommended ranges, and nowadays they're mandatory. And that applies not only to weights, which have always been mandatory, but also to dimensions and undercuts. So there has been a tightening of the rules on dimensions. Bar production and markings, it's a bit similar. Markings, we've gradually asked for more and more. The one interesting one that's referred to a couple of times here is the year marking. And the year marking, is quite a story, because when we initially introduced it, I think it was first mentioned in 1982, you might have said that should have been the end of it. It should have been stated very precisely, this is what we want, this is mandatory, but we didn't. So we allowed existing producers who didn't have year marks to continue. Later on, we said, you've got to have a year mark, but it mustn't be part of the serial number. Later on, we said, it can be part of the serial number. The latest, and I hope the final version of this, is that it can be part of the serial number. It's recommended, actually, that it should be the first 4 digits of the serial number, but you can also have a separate 4-digit year mark. On production, I will just say that, in fact, it's not always about being more restrictive. And you can see here, towards the bottom of the chart, several instances when it has become less restrictive. For instance, the ability to produce silver bars using continuous casting, which came in a few years ago, and more recently still the use of induction tunnels for both gold and silver. On the other hand, certain things have been disallowed. The last one, upside down casting. I don't suppose many people know that you can do upside down casting. We were a bit surprised. It's when you get a 2-part mold where the top, the narrow surface is at the top, so you end up with the cast, the open surface being the narrow one rather than the broad one. A few years ago, we also banned the use of gated molds, which were used in China. So, moving on to bar quality, that became a big issue in the mid-2000s when people became concerned about what they called Fed bars, incorrectly, these US assay office bars, old bars produced in the 1920s and 30s, of which there are still many, many thousands of bars around the vaults, and people began to be concerned about the quality. Huge amount of work was done at that time. Thanks to the Bank of England, very largely, we produced a guide to these a visual guide to the bar defects typically found in Fed bars in 2008. And then more recently, and Ruth referred to this, we launched the online guide to defects in gold and silver bars. And this is to assist refiners in knowing what is and what is not acceptable. Evolution of the non-technical rules, i.e. things like tangible net worth, refined production. Just one interesting thing here, I think. Initially, the LBMA said 10 tons of refined gold production per year is required to apply for good delivery accreditation, and it must be in the form of large bars. Then that was relaxed later on, so it was just 10 tons of refined gold. And now, of course, as you heard from Varsha, and I know this discussion has been going on for some time, it's going to be it's still 10 tons, but you must be able to demonstrate one way or another that you are producing large bars or that you can produce large bars during the proactive monitoring system. Applicant due diligence, that has also gradually tightened over the past 15 years or so. We need more information about directors, about owners, about customers, etc., etc. And of course, most recently, 2012, responsible gold guidance was introduced. Similarly, we have asked for more, better, clearer information of technical nature, starting with the video that we first requested in 2004. Now we expect the video to show the actual casting process, although not all of them show it terribly well just yet. And then finally, proactive monitoring. I'm not going to look at this at all because I think this is not history. This is something that will be very familiar to all of you here. I just mentioned the same thing that Varsha did in the last bullet point there about the casting of large bars. So I think, and thank you very much for the extra 5 minutes, I have finished, and thank you very much for your attention.